Well, this next song is by a young Australian now living in England who has spent most of his 19 years wanting only one thing. Ever since he was a little kid, he's dreamed of becoming part of the singing group comprised of his 3 older brothers, a superstar act since the late 60s. There's an age gap of 9 years between little brother and the youngest member of the trio, and all through his childhood, he sat on the sidelines watching them rehearse, and later, hearing their hit records, seeing their pictures in newspapers and magazines, and of course screaming and applauding along with all the other people at their sold-out concerts. And his dream of dreams was that someday he would be invited to make the brother act a quartet. But the little guy did more than dream. He studied and practiced and performed, and when he was 15, he went out on the road and worked as a solo singer to get experience. 4 long years later, his big brothers, Barry, Morris, and Robin, the Bee Gees, said, "Well, kid, you're good enough to join the act." And those were the words that Andy Gibb had waited all his young life to hear. And then, having attained his goal, he decided to keep on working solo. And this is his first hit song. Andy Gibb and I Just Want to Be Your Everything.
For so long.
Andy Gibb, the little brother of the Bee Gees, at number 37 with his first solo hit, I Just Want to Be Your Everything. 36 hits on our way to number 1 and counting down.
Casey's Coast to Coast.
Well, now I have the number 1 song in America by the singer who worked for 4 years at the same nightclub but couldn't collect 1 cent of pay because he was too young and the wrong nationality. It's the story of Andy Gibb's younger days. Growing up in England, he was tagged by his classmates as the Bee Gees' little brother. And not liking school that much to begin with, he dropped out at the age of 13. Now that just happened to coincide with his family's move to Spain. His parents assumed that Andy would go to school there. But this 13-year-old had other ideas. His famous brothers had given him a guitar 4 years earlier, and by this time he was pretty good. So he set out to find himself a gig near home. He auditioned for several tavern owners and was hired by one. Well, Andy had already started planning how to spend his cash when the Spanish government moved in. They told him that because he was under 18 and not a Spanish citizen, he couldn't work for pay. But Andy took the job just the same. And for the next 4 years, he worked 6 nights a week, 52 weeks a year. Now that's a pretty rough schedule for a young fella, especially when you consider that he didn't have a penny to show for it. But Andy knew that paying those kind of dues would pay off. And at 17, he left Spain to make his mark on the rest of the world, where he gets paid for his services. Currently, he's getting more than just money for his efforts. There's got to be a lot of satisfaction for him knowing he's got the most popular song in the country for the 2nd week in a row, and his 2nd number 1. So, with the number 1 song in America, here's Andy Gibb and Love is Thicker Than Water. Andy Gibb at number 1 for the 2nd week in a row with Love is Thicker Than Water. It'll be interesting to see what happens next week. His brothers are moving up and they're at number 2. Well, we'll save that for next week. You've just heard the 40 most popular records determined by Billboard magazine for the week ending March 11th, 1978.
American Top 40.
Well, now we're up to the latest hit by one of the biggest solo acts of the past 2 years. A sweet-faced young man who told us recently that he used to be a member of the Skinheads, one of the most feared youth gangs in all of England. They were called the Skinheads because their heads were shaved, and they were known for their violent ways, reportedly centered around beating up hippies and members of ethnic minorities. Now, you may find this as hard to believe as we did, but that was the crowd that Andy Gibb fell into when he was 12 years old. He told us that he was bored with school and he dropped out to hang around with his pals. Andy says, "I was a skinhead in a skinhead gang. With the skinheads, the main thing was soccer matches. We would always be getting involved in fights at them. We were really very nasty." But Andy also told us that he personally never went in for violence. He said, "I was really just a young kid who followed the gang around. It was a mixed-up part of my life. I'm glad I got out of it before it was too late." Well, what got Andy out of the Skinheads was the Gibb family's move to Spain. And that was the end of his gang involvement and of his tough way of life. Soon after, Andy decided he wanted to become a singer. And he did. This week, he's at number 13 with another big hit, Desire.
We may be big or small.
Andy Gibb's 2nd week on American Top 40, moving from 22, where it debuted last week, all the way up to 13. That's Desire. 12 hits to number 1, and we're counting them down.